Hi everyone, my name is Aliana and today we're going to talk about native Puerto Ricans. So let's revisit our origins. The Big Five. While we've grown up thinking that Taínos are our only native Puerto Rican heritage, that's not the case. In reality, five distinct cultures have inhabited the island as far as we know. These are the archaic culture, the Hueca culture, the Saladoid culture, the Ostiones culture, and the Taino culture, of course. Here's a timeline so you can visualize when the cultures lived in Puerto Rico. As you can see, there's quite a lot of overlap. Every single one lived with another group, which just shows their coexistence and peaceful nature with each other. Let's start with the archaic culture. The Archaics migrated to the island in 6000 BC and remained here until 300 AD when they merged with the next culture. They were known to be excellent sailors, and this explains how they came all the way from South America to the Caribbean way back when no GPS was available. The Archaics were also masters of stone carving and stone cutting, creating items like mortar and pestle, which is the pilon in Spanish that you can see on your right. Unlike the Taínos, who lived in organized villages, the Archaics lived with their families in small communities. They didn't use any agriculture, so their sailing skills came in handy for fishing. They would eat crab, fish, and even turtles, as well as some marine plant life. And this culture was known for their animist beliefs, meaning they revered nature and gave it supernatural attributes. And this is the start of an animist polytheist faith system on the island. Next, the Hueca culture, La Hueca culture. So this is the longest standing one, meaning it arrived in 250 AD and faded in 1430 AD. So it lasted over a millennium in Puerto Rico. And it likely came from the Andes in South America, the Andes mountain range, as evidenced by a jade sculpture of a condor native to the area. You can see that on your right. And that one was found here. And since there are no condors on the island, well, that was the only logical explanation. The Hueca were one of the newest cultures to be discovered, only around 1977. And it took so long because they weren't always considered their own culture. Now, why is that? Well, first and foremost, the coexistence and cultural diffusion among all the cultures in the region during this long time period, since they were here for so long and they did merge with some other cultures. Well, it wasn't always as easy to identify them, which brings us to the relative similarities between these three cultures: the Archaic, the Hueca, and the Saladoid. However, they did have one thing that set them apart, and that was their agriculture. As I said, the Archaics did not do agriculture, so this was first the one thing that made them stand out from the Archaic culture. And this was combined with the mastery of decoration. For example, they would use clay art by living near a water source and would also do seashell weaponry and decoration, as you can see the seashell necklaces at the bottom. And they also used bohíos, or some sort of predecessor to the bohíos, which were huts made by different components of the palm tree. And they were to be used by the Taínos later on. Next, the Saladoid culture, or the Igneri culture, as it is also known. They appeared in Puerto Rico in 430 AD and disappeared by 800 AD. And the name Saladoid comes from Saladero, which is a cultural region in Venezuela that was originally home to these natives. As you can see, it's right there on the left near the Orinoco Delta in Venezuela. So the Igneri or the Saladoid, arrived on the island and settled into the fields of pottery, agriculture, and ceramics. As you can see on your left, some different pots with the beautiful patterns that they would create. And this is what most easily identified them when it comes to archaeological finds. And they spread to other islands in the Caribbean, which led to a common Caribbean culture that would emerge in the following centuries. The Saladoid were also known for their carvings of South American birds, other animals, and they would make jewelry with materials like turquoise, quartz, and chalcedon, as you can see on your left. We have the Ostiones culture, or the Caracol culture. They came from Punta Ostiones in Cabo Rojo, which is a western coastal municipality here, and it's where their remains were first found. And they surfaced around 430 AD and disappeared near 1000 AD. It's unclear whether the Ostiones were formed directly from the Saladoids or as a combination of smaller groups that may have arrived on the island. And they were known for their simple ceramic skills, some depicting owls and bats, as you can see on your bottom right. Their form of agriculture, the Ostiones way, was some of the most advanced on the island so far. They used the conuco style of harvesting crops. In it, the crop was planted in rows in a designated area, as you can see on your right, and they would be planted once a year and saved for long-term consumption. So we've definitely come a long way from the archaics to now. And lastly, the Taino culture. So they settled on the island around 1100 AD and were nearly wiped out by the 1500s AD due to labor exploitation and diseases linked to the Spaniards. In general, they were known for being more structured and organized in their lives, that could be their religious life, their political life, or their social life, than previous cultures. And they are speculated to be related to the Yanomami natives of the Brazilian Venezuelan Amazon. So let's talk about different facets of their life, starting with art. So the Taínos stood out for their art, which came in many forms, most notably the trigonolites and the petroglyphs. The trigonolites are three-pointed rock figures, most known of which is the semi, which you can see on your top left. And they tended to depict their gods. And the petroglyphs, which are drawings that they carved on rocks, each symbolizing a god or a thought. Here are some more pictures of some broken vases and other pieces of artwork that they would create, some with different patterns, some with depictions of some animals, and on the bottom, some trigonolites, which are pretty dulled. They're not quite as pointy as they normally are. And some more art. These are some little pieces of vases that would have some depictions of animals, and on your right, some of the most commonly depicted symbols on the petroglyphs. For example, on the middle, the white one is a sun, and on the bottom, which is sort of yellow, is a coqui, which is Puerto Rico's native endemic frog. Next, probably my favorite part, the food. So because of a lack of wild animals suitable for consumption on the island, they would turn to fish and vegetables instead. At the yucayeques, or the villages, they would cultivate crops such as cassava, guava, which you can see on your top, sweet potato, and corn. And they would also use the bureng, which is a large stove, to create cassave, which you can see on the bottom, or dried cassava unleavened bread. Next, Taino religion. So the Tainos were polytheists, meaning they believed in multiple deities, mostly related to natural forces. The main protector deity was called Yukiyu or Jogahu. He's on the top, and is one of the most commonly depicted in the Trigonolites. Atabey in the middle was the main female deity, the goddess of the waters and the moon. Now, contrary to popular belief, Huracan, which is where the word hurricane comes from, or the evil weather deity, was not called that by the Taínos, but rather by the Spaniards. The evil weather deity, she was called Guaban 6 in the Taíno language. Taíno ceremonies and traditions. The Taínos would build batalles, or large open courts, marked by decorated stones. They would meet up at night to have discussions, parties, and religious ceremonies. For example, the areitos were ceremonies to share history and culture to the sound of instruments like the maraca and the guiro. And they would also play the batu game, where they would kick around a ball for fun, and the ball was made of compacted tree roots, and they would also use the game to settle disputes peacefully. It was also common for them to play the mayohabao drums made of hollow wood and dance along to the rhythm. Taíno language. Their language was part of the larger Arawak branch of the Caribbean and South America. It was spoken in Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, Turks and Caicos, and other islands in the Lesser Antilles. And it is divided into the Siboney dialect and the Classic dialect. The former was more common in Cuba, Jamaica, and the Bahamas, while the latter was more widespread. And some of the words still used from the language include canoa or canoe, huracán or hurricane, ají, which is a type of pepper, iguana, maíz or corn, tuna, which actually refers to a type of fig, not the fish, barbacoa or barbecue, Jayuya, which with a J is the name of a municipality that we will talk about later, the country Cuba, which means fertile place, and the country Haiti, which means mountainous land. And on the right, you can see a map of different Native American tribes, and on the bottom, you can see the Our Father prayer in Taíno, which the Spaniards would help translate. Taíno leadership. So the Taínos were led both politically and religiously by the cacique, and he or she would lead districts that range anywhere from a few families to up to 600 or more people. The caciques would also host religious festivals and ceremonies, working as the middleman between man and the gods. Despite their power, however, they didn't own any specific land since they all believed that land was public. Their only exclusive domains were their duties, sitting on the special duho chair, which we will see later, and living in a slightly larger house. And they could also take multiple wives.